The scent hit her before the sound did. Pine, rain, and a sickeningly sweet undercurrent of freesia, her sister's perfume, tangled intimately with Cain's dark wood smoke musk. Lisa stood outside the heavy oak doors of the Alpha King's private study, her hand resting on the brass handle, the chill of the metal biting into her skin. Inside, a soft gasp, followed by a low, rumbling groan she knew too well. She didn't scream. She didn't burst in and demand answers. Her hand fell from the handle, steady and calm. She pressed a hand to her subtly swollen belly, a secret only she and the moon goddess knew. They want to tear down a queen, she thought, the ice settling in her veins. Let them. I will give this kingdom an heir, just not the one they expect. She turned on her heel, the silence of her departure the loudest sound in the empty hall. The winter solstice gala was always a spectacle of velvet, crystal, and calculated alliances. Lisa stood near the massive hearth in the grand hall of the Obsidian Pack, nursing a glass of sparkling cider. As the Luna of the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories, her composure was a weapon she wielded with effortless grace. She watched the swirling couples on the dance floor, her gaze inevitably tracking her mate, Alpha King Cain. He was a force of nature, all broad shoulders and dark, brooding intensity. Tonight, however, his attention seemed fixed on a familiar figure cloaked in emerald silk. Maya, Lisa's younger sister. Lisa took a slow sip of her drink, the cider tasting suddenly like ash. The whispers had started weeks ago. Glances held a beat too long, casual touches that lingered. She had dismissed them as pack gossip, the idle chatter of wolves with too much time and too little loyalty. But tonight, the air hummed with a different energy. A sharp intake of breath beside her drew Lisa's attention. Beta Marcus, Cain's closest confidant, stood there, his jaw tight. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Luna," Marcus murmured, a slight dip of his head his only greeting. "Marcus." Lisa's voice was smooth, betraying none of the sudden tightness in her chest. "Enjoying the festivities?" "Always, Luna." He hesitated, shifting his weight. "Though, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the perimeter guards." Lisa watched him retreat, his haste telling her more than any words could. She looked back toward the dance floor. Cain and Maya were gone. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. She set her glass down on a passing tray and slipped away from the warmth of the hall, her movements silent as a shadow. The corridors of the pack house were dimly lit, the heavy tapestries absorbing the sounds of the party. She let her instincts guide her, the faint, overlapping scents of wood smoke and freesia leading her toward Cain's private wing. As she approached his study, the sounds grew distinct. A muffled laugh, the heavy thud of a book hitting the floor, and then unmistakable silence. Lisa stopped at the oak door, her hand hovering over the handle. The scent was overpowering now, a potent, undeniable mix of arousal and betrayal. It wasn't just a physical scent. It was the smell of broken vows and shattered trust. She stood there, suspended in time, the reality of the moment crashing over her. She didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, a profound, terrifying clarity washed over her. She placed her hand on her abdomen, tracing the slight curve hidden beneath the flowing fabric of her gown. 2 heartbeats, faint but steady, fluttered against her palm. Twins. Cain's legacy. The heirs the council had been demanding for 3 years. She closed her eyes, the image of Cain's face, the man she had sworn to love and protect, burning behind her eyelids. He was strong, powerful, and utterly weak. He had chosen the thrill of the forbidden over the steadfastness of their bond. Lisa turned away from the door, the heavy oak a physical barrier between her past and her future. She wouldn't be the weeping Luna, pleading for scraps of affection. She wouldn't be the victim of her sister's ambition and her mate's infidelity. She walked back toward the grand hall, her head held high, the secret of the twins a shield against the incoming storm. The Alpha King had made his choice. Now, it was her turn. The morning light was harsh, casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds of the Obsidian Pack. Lisa stood by the large bay window in her chambers, watching the pack awaken. It was a normal morning for them. Training, patrols, the mundane tasks of survival. For her, it was the end of an era. She had spent the night awake, staring at the canopy of her bed, formulating a plan. Leaving was the only option. To stay was to accept the indignity, to watch Maya gloat, to see the pity in the eyes of the pack. She wouldn't subject her children to that environment. A soft knock broke her reverie. "Enter," she said, her voice steady. Her maid Ilara entered carrying a tray of tea and toast. "Good morning, Luna. You were up early?" "Yes, Ilara. I have much to do today." Lisa turned from the window, her expression unreadable. "I need you to pack a bag for me. Only essentials. Nothing that bears the pack crest." Ilara stopped, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. "Luna, are you leaving?" Lisa met the younger woman's gaze, seeing the fear and confusion there. "Yes, Ilara, I am going on a journey." "But Alpha Cain, does he know?" "Alpha Cain is occupied," Lisa said, the words tasting bitter but necessary. "This is a journey I must take alone." She spent the next hour gathering what she needed: sturdy clothes, practical boots, and the small cache of funds she had quietly set aside over the years. She took no jewels, no finery. She left the Luna ring on the vanity, a silent testament to her abdication. As she moved through the pack house, she kept her scent masked, her presence small. She avoided the main corridors, taking the servants' passages that led to the western gate. The air was biting cold as she stepped outside. She pulled her cloak tighter around her, the rough wool a stark contrast to the silks she usually wore. She didn't look back at the imposing structure that had been her home. The journey was grueling. The northern territories were unforgiving, especially in winter. She traveled mostly by night, avoiding the established trails, relying on her instincts and the moon for guidance. The physical exertion was a distraction from the emotional turmoil churning within her. Days bled into weeks. She crossed borders, navigating neutral territories, her pregnant state a constant, exhausting reality. She had to find a sanctuary, a place where Cain's reach couldn't touch her. Her destination was the Silver Peak Pack, a domain ruled by Alpha King Silas. Silas was known for his ruthlessness, his pack a formidable force in the West. But he was also known for his strict adherence to old pack laws, specifically those regarding sanctuary. It was a gamble approaching Silas. He owed Cain no favors. In fact, their packs had a long history of border skirmishes. But Lisa knew that Silas respected strength, and he despised Cain. It was the only leverage she had. She arrived at the borders of Silver Peak exhausted, half-starved, and shivering uncontrollably. The border guards found her collapsed against a snowbank, her breath ragged. "Who goes there?" a gruff voice demanded, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn. Lisa forced her eyes open, struggling to focus on the large wolves circling her. She recognized the silver and blue insignias of Silas's pack. "I am Lisa," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper against the howling wind. Former Luna of the Obsidian Pack. I seek an audience with Alpha King Silas. The guards exchanged wary glances. One stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in her bedraggled state and the undeniable swell of her belly. The Obsidian Luna, he scoffed. Here? Why? I am seeking sanctuary, Lisa managed to say, before darkness claimed her. She woke to the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. It was a comforting, primal scent that grounded her before she even opened her eyes. The bed beneath her was softer than the frozen ground she had grown accustomed to, and the room was warm. Lisa slowly opened her eyes, taking in the rustic but well-appointed chamber. Heavy furs covered the bed, and a large fireplace dominated one wall. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen made her wince. I wouldn't move if I were you. The voice was deep, resonant, and entirely unfamiliar. Lisa turned her head to see a man sitting in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. He was carving a piece of wood with a hunting knife, his movements precise and unhurried. He was older than Cain, his dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. His face was a landscape of harsh angles and old scars, his eyes a piercing, startling blue. He radiated a quiet, dangerous power that made the hair on the back of Lisa's neck stand up. Alpha King Silas, she stated, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas stopped carving and looked at her. You have a remarkable constitution, Lisa of Obsidian. My healer said you were half dead when my guards found you. I am not of obsidian anymore, Lisa corrected quietly, resting a hand protectively over her stomach. Silas's gaze followed the movement. So I see. And yet, you carry the scent of Alpha Cain's bloodline. Lisa didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. I carry my children, she said, her voice steady. They are my bloodline now. Silas chuckled, a low, dry sound. A defiant one. I like that. But defiance doesn't explain why Cain's former mate, is seeking sanctuary in my territory. I am here because Cain broke the mating bond, Lisa said, the words still sharp on her tongue. He chose my sister. I chose not to stay and watch. Silas raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. Cain? The supposedly infallible leader of the North? He broke a bond for a lesser wolf? My sister is many things, but she is not a lesser wolf in her ambition, Lisa replied bitterly. And so you ran, Silas observed, returning to his carving. A pregnant female, alone in the dead of winter. A foolish move or a desperate one, a necessary one, Lisa countered. I will not raise my children in a pack built on lies and betrayal. Silas was silent for a long moment, the only sound the scrape of his knife against the wood. Sanctuary is not a right, Lisa. It is a privilege granted by the Alpha. What do you offer in return? Lisa met his piercing gaze unflinchingly. I offer you knowledge, Silas. I was Luna of Obsidian for 5 years. I know Cain's strategies, his weaknesses, the layout of his defenses. I know things his beta doesn't even know. Silas stopped carving again. He leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. You would betray your former pack? They betrayed me first, Lisa said, her voice cold and hard. I owe them nothing. Silas studied her for a long time, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he nodded slowly. You have fire, Lisa. I can use fire. You may stay. You and your children. He stood up, towering over the bed. But make no mistake. If I find out you are a spy for Cain, or if you bring trouble to my borders, the sanctuary ends. Violently. I understand, Lisa said. And I thank you, Alpha Silas. Don't thank me yet, Silas said, turning toward the door. Survival in Silver Peak is not for the weak. We will see if you are truly as strong as you think you are. He left the room, the heavy wooden door closing behind him, with a thud of finality. Lisa let out a long, shaky breath, her hand returning to her stomach. She had secured a haven, but she knew the true battle was only just beginning. She had survived the betrayal. Now, she had to survive the sanctuary. The months in Silver Peak were a blur of grueling physical recovery and constant, quiet observation. Lisa learned the rhythms of Silas's pack. They were rougher, more pragmatic than the obsidian wolves. There were fewer galas and more training drills, less political maneuvering and more direct confrontations. Silas remained an enigma. He rarely spoke to her directly, yet she felt his presence constantly. He watched her train with the females, observed her as she helped in the infirmary, and noted the stoic grace with which she handled the difficult pregnancy. When her time came, it was brutal and swift. A sudden, sharp agony that tore through her during a late spring snowstorm. The pack healer, an old, grizzled she-wolf named Martha, attended her. "Push, girl, push," Martha barked, her hands covered in blood and amniotic fluid. Lisa screamed, the sound tearing from her throat as she bore down. The pain was blinding, a primal force that threatened to consume her. She gripped the edges of the bed until her knuckles turned white, her body slick with sweat. And then, a cry. A thin, reedy wail that cut through the sound of the howling wind outside. "A boy," Martha announced, quickly cleaning the squalling infant. Lisa collapsed back onto the pillows, gasping for air. But the respite was brief. The pain surged again, sharper this time. "There's another one," Martha said grimly. "Brace yourself." The second birth was harder, the exhaustion setting in. Lisa pushed until she felt she would break apart, her vision graying around the edges. When the second cry finally filled the room, it was stronger, more demanding than the first. "Another boy," Martha said, her voice filled with a rare, quiet awe. "Twins, healthy and strong." She placed the two squirming bundles in Lisa's arms. Lisa looked down at them, a fierce, overwhelming love washing over her, pushing aside the exhaustion and the lingering pain. They were perfect. They had Cain's dark hair, but as they opened their eyes, she saw they had her amber gaze. Not his, she thought fiercely, pulling them closer. Mine. The door opened, and Silas stepped into the room. He took in the scene, the blood, the exhaustion, the two tiny lives in Lisa's arms. He moved closer, his blue eyes unreadable as he looked down at the twins. "Heirs," he murmured, his voice low. "My heirs," Lisa corrected firmly, though her voice was weak. Silas met her gaze, a strange glint in his eyes. "They carry the blood of obsidian, but they are born in Silver Peak. They are part of this pack now." Lisa didn't argue. She knew the truth of his words. They needed a pack, a protector. "What will you name them?" Silas asked. "Kale and Kalen," Lisa said, the names she had chosen during the long, lonely nights of her journey. "Strong names," Silas noted, He reached out, a surprisingly gentle movement, and touched Kale's tiny fist. The baby instinctively curled his fingers around the alpha's large thumb. "They will need training," Silas said, stepping back. "They will need a father figure." Lisa stiffened. "I can raise them." "You can mother them," Silas corrected, his tone brooking no argument. "But a male needs a male to teach him how to be a wolf, how to be an alpha. I will train them." Lisa stared at him, the implications of his offer hanging heavy in the air. Silas was offering to raise Cain's children, the sons of his enemy. It was a calculated move, one that could secure the future of Silver Peak and strike a devastating blow to Obsidian. "Why?" Lisa asked, her voice a harsh whisper. Silas looked at her, his expression grim. "Because as Cain threw away a queen to play with a pawn, and because these boys," he gestured to the twins, "have the potential to be greater than him, I will make sure they are." Lisa looked down at her sons, then back at Silas. It was a dangerous alliance, one built on mutual hatred for the man who had wronged them both. But as she held Kale and Kaelin, she knew she would do whatever it took to ensure their survival and their strength. "Agreed," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. "You will train them, but they remain mine." "They will be Silver Peak," Silas promised, a fierce satisfaction in his eyes. "And they will make Obsidian tremble." 5 winters had passed since Lisa crossed the border into Silver Peak, trading the opulent deceit of Obsidian for the harsh, unforgiving truth of the mountains. In the training yard, the morning air was sharp enough to crack stone. Lisa stood on the wooden balcony of the Alpha's lodge, her hands wrapped around a mug of bitter black tea, watching the sparring ring below. Kale and Kaelin, now 5 years old, moved with a lethal grace that belied their age. They were a terrifying amalgamation of 2 dominant bloodlines. Cain's raw, explosive power, tempered by the calculating, icy precision Silas had drilled into them since they could walk. "Drop your shoulder, Kale." Silas's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. He wasn't sitting on the sidelines. He was in the dirt with them, his massive frame a towering mountain against their small forms. "You telegraph your strikes. The enemy won't wait for you to wind up. Move." Kale, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, adjusted his stance. Beside him, Kaelin watched, his amber eyes so perfectly mirroring Lisa's, tracking his brother's movement before launching a synchronized flanking maneuver. Silas caught Kaelin's arm, using the boy's momentum to flip him gently into a snowbank, while simultaneously blocking Kale's strike. It was brutal, relentless work, and it was exactly what they needed. Lisa didn't flinch as Kaelin hit the snow. She knew the whispering that went on in the lower ranks of the pack. They wondered how a mother could let a foreign alpha treat her sons like soldiers. They didn't understand that Silas was arming them against a world that would want them dead the moment their parentage was discovered. Silas called an end to the drill, tossing a towel to each boy. He looked up, his piercing blue eyes finding Lisa on the balcony instantly. The look that passed between them was heavy, laden with years of unspoken respect and a quiet, simmering tension that had slowly replaced their initial, wary alliance. 10 minutes later, Silas stepped into her study. He smelled of pine, sweat, and the crisp winter air. He poured himself a glass of water, his chest heaving slightly. "They are getting faster," Silas observed, leaning against the heavy oak desk. "They are getting reckless," Lisa countered, setting her mug down. "Kyle relies too much on his temper. He gets that from his father." Silas's jaw tightened at the mention of Cain. "I will beat it out of him," A king cannot afford to lead with his rage. You speak as if their crowns are already forged, Silas. They are, he said softly, holding her gaze. Obsidian is bleeding, Lisa. My scouts returned from the southern ridge this morning. The air in the room seemed to thin. Lisa straightened her spine, the Luna protocol she thought she had abandoned snapping into place. What did they report? Marcus was sniffing around the neutral zone, Silas said, watching her carefully for a reaction. Cain is desperate. 5 years, and your sister's womb remains barren. The Obsidian Council is fracturing. They demand an heir, and Maya cannot provide one. A cold, hollow satisfaction settled in Lisa's chest. Maya had stolen a mate, but she couldn't steal a legacy. Does Cain know I am here? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. No. He thinks you perished in the northern wastes. But Marcus is looking for something, or someone. Silas pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them. He stopped just inches away, his towering presence demanding all the oxygen in the room. The winter summit is in 3 days at the Hollows. Cain will be there. Then we will be there too, Lisa said without hesitation. Silas reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to the violence of his hands in the training yard. You don't have to face him. I can handle Cain. He broke me, Silas, Lisa whispered, leaning infinitesimally into his touch. Or he thought he did. I need to look into his eyes and let him see exactly what he threw away. Silas's eyes darkened, a fierce, possessive alpha growl vibrating in his chest. You are not the Luna he discarded, Lisa. You are the Queen of Silver Peak in all but name. When he looks at you, he will only see his ruin. The Hollows was a cavernous, subterranean stronghold carved into the neutral mountains between the territories. Torches sputtered against the damp stone, casting long, wavering shadows across the circular stone table that served as the negotiating grounds. Lisa stood near the rear of the Silver Peak delegation, her face hidden beneath the deep cowl of a heavy, fur-lined cloak. She kept her scent meticulously suppressed with a blend of crushed winter mint and ash, a trick Martha the healer had taught her. The heavy iron doors at the far end of the cavern groaned open. The Obsidian delegation entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. At the forefront was Alpha King Cain. Lisa felt a strange, detached curiosity as she looked at the man who had once been her entire world. He was still undeniably powerful, his broad shoulders filling out his dark velvet coat. But the vibrant, brooding intensity that had once captivated her was gone. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with exhaustion. The crown on his head looked less like a symbol of power and more like an unbearable weight. Beside him walked Maya. She was draped in emerald silk, glittering with diamonds. But the triumph she had worn 5 years ago had soured into a brittle, anxious energy. She clung to Cain's arm, a grip that looked more like desperation than affection. Cain didn't even look at her. Silas sat at the head of his side of the table, his posture relaxed, exuding the quiet, lethal confidence of a predator with a full belly. Alpha Silas, Cain greeted, his voice rough, lacking its usual commanding resonance. Alpha Cain, Silas replied smoothly, not rising. Let us dispense with the pleasantries. Your borders are weak. Your patrols have encroached on my southern ridges 3 times this moon. I want compensation. The negotiations began. A tense back and forth over hunting rights, border lines, and trade routes. Cain was belligerent, snapping at his beta, Marcus, and issuing threats he clearly lacked the manpower to enforce. Silas parried every aggressive thrust with cold logic and veiled threats of his own. Lisa watched the dynamic with a strategist's eye. Obsidian was not just bleeding. It was dying. Cain was leading with emotion, reacting blindly. How we yield the Western lumber tract. Cain finally snarled, slamming his fist onto the stone table. But I demand access to the silver veins in the lower valley. Denied, Silas said simply. You pushed too far, Silas. Maya interjected, her voice sharp and shrill, echoing off the stone walls. We are the Obsidian Pack. We demand respect. Silas slowly turned his gaze to Maya. His eyes were flat, terrifyingly empty. I am speaking to the Alpha King. I do not negotiate with concubines who wear stolen crowns. A collective gasp echoed through the cavern. Cain leaped to his feet, a furious roar tearing from his throat, his eyes flashing wolf gold. His claws elongated, scoring deep gouges into the stone table. You dare disrespect my Luna? Cain bellowed, the sheer force of his voice rattling the torches. I see no Luna, Silas replied, completely unfazed. Only a placeholder. In his rage, Cain surged forward, slamming his hands onto the table. The sudden movement disrupted the air currents in the room. A draft swept through the cavern, catching the edge of Lisa's cloak and billowing it backward. The scent of ash and mint scattered. Underneath it, the faint, undeniable scent of freesia and a unique, deep amber resonance hit the air. Cain froze. The golden rage in his eyes abruptly shattered, replaced by a violent, paralyzing shock. His nostrils flared, his chest heaving as he desperately tracked the scent. His head snapped toward the rear of the Silver Peak delegation. Lisa knew the exact moment he found her. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and pushed the cowl back from her head. She met Cain's wide, disbelieving eyes. Her face a mask of absolute, chilling indifference. Silence clamped down on the cavern, absolute and suffocating. The only sound was the harsh, ragged sound of Cain breathing. Lisa? The name fell from his lips like a prayer and a curse, breathless and broken. Maya whirled around, the color draining from her perfectly painted face. When her eyes landed on her sister, a choked, terrified noise escaped her throat. No, Maya whimpered, stumbling backward. You're dead. The winter, the wolves. I survived, Maya, Lisa said, her voice clear, steady, and carrying across the stone room without an ounce of effort. No thanks to either of you. Cain scrambled around the massive stone table, knocking over his own chair. His beta, Marcus, tried to grab his arm, but Cain shoved him away with terrifying force. He stopped 10 paces from Lisa, his eyes frantically roaming over her face, her hair, the confident set of her shoulders. You're alive, Cain breathed, a sudden, desperate hope lighting up his hollow eyes. He took another step forward, reaching out. Lisa, my mate. Before Cain could take another step, Silas moved. He didn't rush. He simply stepped between Lisa and Cain, his massive body completely eclipsing Lisa from Cain's view. A low, bone-rattling growl emanated from Silas's chest, a sound that demanded absolute submission. Take another step toward her, Cain, and I will rip your throat out right here. Silas warned, his voice a deadly purr. Cain's upper lip curled, his alpha pride warring with his desperation. Step aside, Silas. She is my mate. She belongs to Obsidian. She belongs to no one but herself, Silas countered, his eyes locked on Cain. But she is under the protection of Silver Peak. She is my chief strategist. Strategist? Cain laughed, a harsh, slightly unhinged sound. He looked around Silas to meet Lisa's eyes. Lisa, come home. Whatever he's offering you, I can give you more. You are the true Luna. I was a fool. I see it now. Maya was a mistake. Behind him, Maya let out a devastated sob, crumpling into Marcus's arms. Lisa didn't even look at her sister. She kept her eyes on Cain, feeling nothing but a profound, overwhelming pity. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by this desperate, broken creature begging for scraps. A mistake? Lisa tilted her head, her voice devoid of any warmth. You didn't make a mistake, Cain. You made a choice. You chose her bed, and you chose to shatter our bond. There is no home for me in Obsidian. We can fix it, Cain pleaded, his voice cracking. The mate bond, it's still there. I can feel it. You feel an echo of something you killed? Lisa replied coldly. Cain shook his head frantically. As he did, he inhaled deeply, trying to draw in her scent to calm his panicked wolf. He paused, his brow furrowed. The scent of freesia and amber was there. Yes, but beneath it, clinging to the heavy wool of her cloak, was something else. The faint, distinct scent of milk, crushed pine, and young wolves. Plural. Cain's eyes went wide, the pupils dilating until they were almost entirely black. He looked at Lisa, really looked at her, noting the slight widening of her hips, the matriarchal fullness of her posture. The timeline crashed down on him with the force of a falling mountain. 5 years ago. She had left right after. You. Cain choked out, taking a staggering step backward. You were pregnant when you left. You had my child. Lisa's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened into polished diamond. No, Cain, Lisa said softly, every word a perfectly placed dagger. I had my children, and you will never, ever touch them. The journey back to Silver Peak was a tense, silent march. The revelation at the Hollows had ignited a powder keg, and the fuse was burning rapidly. When they arrived at the pack house, Lisa didn't go to her chambers. She went straight to the training yard, dismissing the guards. Kyle and Kaylin were sitting by the fire pit, whittling sticks, their faces smeared with dirt. As soon as they saw her, they scrambled up. Mother! Kaylin called out, running to hug her waist. Kyle followed, though with a bit more restraint, offering a formal nod before leaning into her touch. Lisa dropped to her knees in the snow, pulling both boys fiercely against her chest. She buried her face in their dark hair, inhaling their scent, a scent Cain now knew existed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a violent, protective cadence. Heavy boots crunched in the snow behind her. Silas stood there, his long coat sweeping the ground. He looked down at the trio, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his broad shoulders betrayed his anxiety. Boys, Silas said, his voice surprisingly gentle, go to the kitchens. Tell Martha to give you the honeyed oats. They didn't argue. They sensed the shift in the air, the heavy scent of impending war. They scampered off, leaving Lisa kneeling in the snow. Silas extended a massive, scarred hand. Lisa looked at it for a moment before placing hers within it. He pulled her up effortlessly, not letting go once she was on her feet. He will come for them, Lisa said, the words tasting like ash. He knows they are his. He suspects, Silas corrected, and it doesn't matter what he knows. They are in my territory. They wear my pack's colors. They are my sons. Lisa looked up at him, struck by the fierce, unyielding conviction in his blue eyes. Over the past 5 years, Silas hadn't just protected them. He had fathered them. He had stayed up during their fevers, taught them how to track in the snow, and punished them fairly when they misbehaved. "He will declare war, Silas," Lisa warned, stepping closer to him, seeking the radiant heat of his body against the winter chill. "Obsidian may be bleeding, but a cornered beast is dangerous. I brought this to your door." Silas brought his other hand up, cupping her face. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a gesture of profound tenderness from a man known for his ruthlessness. "You brought life to my door, Lisa," Silas murmured, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. "Silver Peak was a fortress of ice before you arrived. You and the boys. You gave us a heart. I did not take you in simply to spite Cain. I took you in because I looked at you, broken, freezing, and defiant, and saw an equal." Lisa's breath hitched. She stared into his eyes, seeing the raw honesty there. The ghost of Cain, the pain of Maya's betrayal. It all seemed to evaporate under the intensity of Silas's gaze. "Be my Luna, Lisa?" Silas asked softly, the question lacking any of the typical alpha command. It was a genuine plea from a man to a woman. "Not in shadows, not as a strategist. Stand beside me. Let them see that Silver Peak has a queen, and let Cain break himself against our walls." Tears, the tears she had refused to shed 5 years ago outside Cain's door, finally pricked the corners of her eyes. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. She leaned up, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. Silas responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was deep, solid, and utterly grounding. It tasted of snow, mint, and absolute certainty. When they finally parted, Lisa rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. "I will be your Luna," she promised. Miles away, in the dark, decaying halls of Obsidian, Cain sat alone on his throne. He had banished Maya to the lower chambers. The grand hall was empty, the hearth fire reduced to dying embers. He gripped the armrests of the throne until the wood splintered beneath his claws. He had heirs, 2 strong, healthy pups. He could feel it in his marrow. "Marcus," Cain growled into the empty hall. His beta stepped out of the shadows, his face grim. "Alpha, summon the War Council," Cain ordered, his voice devoid of reason, fueled only by obsession and madness. "Conscript every male of fighting age. Empty the armories." "Cain," Marcus hesitated. "A winter siege against Silver Peak? It is suicide. The pack is already starving." Cain's head snapped toward his beta, his eyes glowing with an unnatural, toxic light. "I don't care if every wolf in Obsidian burns," Cain whispered, his voice echoing in the dead hall. "I am getting my family back." The blizzard howled through the jagged mountain passes like a wounded beast, driving ice sharp as glass into the valley below. From the high stone battlements of Silver Peak, Lisa looked down at the encroaching dark mass. She was wrapped in Silas's heavy sable fur cloak, the silver wolf crest of his pack pinned proudly over her heart. Beside her stood Silas, an immovable mountain of calm, his blue eyes tracking the slow, agonizing crawl of the Obsidian army. It was not a grand, terrifying invasion. It was a death march. Cain's forces finally dragged themselves to a halt 50 yards from the towering iron gates of the fortress. Lisa felt a sharp ache in her chest. not for Cain, but for the wolves who had been forced to follow him. They were shivering, their armor hung loosely on half-starved frames, and their eyes were hollow with exhaustion. They had marched through the dead of winter, driven only by the manic obsession of a king who had lost his mind. Cain stood at the front of the line. The proud, imposing alpha, who had once commanded the north, was gone. His dark hair was matted with snow, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with a feverish, toxic gold light. Beside him stood Marcus. The beta's posture slumped, his hand resting loosely on the pommel of his sword. There was no Maya. Cain had likely left her to freeze in the decaying halls of obsidian, a discarded plaything now that he knew his true heirs existed. "Lisa!" Cain's voice tore through the roaring wind, ragged and desperate. He took a stumbling step towards the gates. "Lisa, come out. Bring me my sons. Open these gates, and I will spare Silas's pack." Silas scoffed softly, the sound barely carrying over the wind. "He brings freezing, starving men to the strongest fortress in the territory and demands my surrender. He is completely broken." "He broke himself," Lisa murmured. She placed a gloved hand on Silas's arm. "Let me." Silas nodded, stepping back half a pace to give her the floor. A silent, powerful gesture of his respect. He was the Alpha King, but in this moment, she was the absolute authority. Lisa stepped up to the edge of the parapet, looking down at the man who had shattered her heart 5 years ago. She felt no fear, no lingering pull of the mating bond. She felt only the cold, hard certainty of the ice. "There is nothing for you here, Cain." Lisa's voice, amplified by the acoustics of the valley walls, rang out clear and steady. "Go home. Feed your people. Go back before the winter claims the rest of your men." Cain bared his teeth, shifting into a massive, frost-bitten black wolf with a sickening crunch of bone. He hurled himself at the iron gates, his claws screeching uselessly against the reinforced metal. It was a pathetic, horrifying display of impotent rage. He shifted back to his human form, naked and trembling in the snow, ignoring Marcus, who rushed forward to drape a heavy cloak over his freezing shoulders. "Attack!" Cain screamed at his men, his voice cracking violently. He pointed a shaking finger at the high walls. "Breach the gates, tear down the stone, bring me my Luna and my pups." Silence answered him. Only the wind whistled through the jagged rocks. Not a single obsidian wolf moved forward. Marcus, standing a step behind Cain, looked up at the battlements. He saw Lisa, radiant, strong, and undeniably safe. He saw the impenetrable walls of Silver Peak, manned by warriors who were well-fed and warmly clothed. Then, Marcus looked back at the shivering, starving men of Obsidian. Men who had been dragged from their families, forced to abandon their hunting grounds for a war born of one man's wounded ego. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus drew his longsword from its scabbard. Cain turned, a manic grin splitting his frozen lips. "Yes, Marcus, lead the charge. Burn it to the ground." But Marcus didn't point his blade at the gates. He drove it tip first deep into the snowpack and stepped back, removing his hand from the hilt. "No," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp, freezing air. Cain spun around, his frantic smile morphing into absolute, bewildered rage. "Treason. I am your Alpha King. You will obey me." "You were our Alpha King," Marcus corrected, his voice heavy with years of suppressed sorrow. "An Alpha protects his pack, Cain. You have starved us. You let our defenses crumble while you wallowed in a bed that you shouldn't have been in. And now, you drag us into the freezing wastes to reclaim a woman you discarded and children you never earned. We will not die for your regret." A heavy, profound silence fell over the valley. And then the sound began. Clatter, clang, thud. One by one, the obsidian warriors dropped their swords, axes, and shields into the snow. The mass surrender echoed off the mountains like a localized avalanche. They lowered their heads, submitting not to Cain, but to the harsh reality of their own survival. Cain backed away, his eyes darting frantically from his men to Marcus, and finally back up to the battlements. Cowards, traitors, you are all dead. He was entirely alone. The realization hit him with physical force, driving him to his knees in the snow. His pack had abandoned him. His power was an illusion. The heavy iron gates of Silver Peak groaned, grinding open just enough for a single figure to step out into the storm. Silas. He walked unarmed, his massive frame unbothered by the biting cold. He moved with the slow, terrifying grace of an apex predator, stopping exactly 10 paces from where Cain knelt in the snow. "Your men have laid down their arms," Silas stated, his voice booming across the white expanse. "By the old laws of the North, they are now refugees seeking asylum. They are under the protection of Silver Peak. If you touch them, you answer to me." A strangled sob tore from Cain's throat. Driven by the last dregs of his shattered pride, he lunged at Silas, his claws extending. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of authority. Silas didn't even shift. He simply stepped inside Cain's wild swing, caught him by the throat, and slammed him into the icy earth with earth-shattering force. The breath rushed out of Cain's lungs in a white cloud. Silas's thumb pressed against Cain's windpipe, holding him utterly paralyzed. "I should kill you for bringing war to my home," Silas growled, his face inches from Cain's. But death is too quick a release for a king who destroyed his own kingdom. Silas released him, standing up and turning his back on Cain, the ultimate, humiliating display of a dominance. He walked back toward the open gates. Lisa stood at the threshold, waiting. As Silas passed her, their hands brushed, a silent exchange of absolute trust. Lisa stepped forward, looking down at the broken man sobbing into the snow. "I reject you, Cain of Obsidian," Lisa said, the ancient words of severance rolling off her tongue with a finality that shook the very air. As the words left her, the last faint, agonizing tether of the mating bond snapped, vanishing into the winter wind. She felt lighter than she had in 5 years. "Do not ever return to my lands." She turned, walking back into the warmth of the fortress. The heavy iron gates slammed shut behind her, the resounding boom echoing through the valley, leaving Cain alone in the cold, silent white. Inside the towering walls of Silver Peak, the hearths burned bright, casting a warm, golden glow against the stone. Lisa sat by the massive fireplace, Kyle and Kaelin tucked safely against her sides, their breathing even and deep as they slept. Silas entered the room, brushing the last of the snow from his broad shoulders. He took the seat beside them, his large, calloused hand gently covering hers. The storm raged outside, burying the ghosts of her past in ice. But within these walls, the Alpha King and his true Luna had built an unbreakable sanctuary of love, loyalty, and strength. Thank you for experiencing this cinematic tale of betrayal, resilience, and true love. If you enjoyed, the Alpha King slept with her sister. She didn't cry. She let another king raise his twins. Please hit that like button, share the story with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe for more epic, dramatic stories. Let us know in the comments if you think Cain got what he deserved.